And it may be, if you look at the first British astronaut in space, she said that we're probably looking for aliens in the wrong places, that the beings may be here and have always been here. So, for example, if a being is in some kind of plasmate form, well, then the same beings could have lived on the planet for a long period of time, but we're unable to see them. So what we see when we look at these ancient stories, and right up to recent times, in religious perspective, in all the traditions, you see this idea of possession. If we accept that some of the beings, such as demons, for example, exist, as a lot of people believe, well, we begin to get into a similar range, that some of the figures that we call demons may be consistent with some other life forms that exist. And these demons are not, for a lot of people, they're ontologically real, that they exist. And if you read, if one accepts about exorcisms or possessions, we're getting into a similar domain. And the idea that a being of a different form can move into your space, and it may merely be that they are at a different level or operate in a zone that we haven't been thinking about, and that science is incapable of identifying. And science believes that it knows everything, but there's a lot of things that it can't explain. So there is a similarity. If they don't exist in that physical form that we can identify, we also have to be aware that our consciousness and how we perceive the world is able to interpret subtler things that science can't quantify. So there may be different, maybe less a physical explanation than an understanding of how the world out there exists. Scientists say more and more that what we perceive when we look out of our eyes is nothing like the real world. And if they say that, people like Donald Hoffman, saying that, they usually use that to reduce your consciousness. I'd use that to expand your consciousness. By the same token, they have to accept then that there's a whole range of forces out there that they have no idea what they're about. It's only we only have to go back 100 years and look at what science conception of the world, and they thought they knew everything, and then it changes. We move from classic physics to quantum physics. So scientists don't have sufficient humility in this to accept that there are a range of forces that we have to keep our mind open, that we may not be able to comprehend, especially if we believe this idea that all the aliens are kind of out there somewhere and going to come a rocket like in the films. We have to bear in mind the possibilities that there's a whole range of consciousness we can't understand, and we can't even understand, as we talked about, animal consciousness. That's why people like John Lilly and that was doing those experiments, trying to communicate with dolphins, for example.
As far as the intentions of these UFOs, you mentioned all the different types of beings that there could possibly be out there. And we've heard of all these different ships, and some of them may have bases underwater. There's certainly something going on underwater with these UFOs. What do you think some of the intentions could possibly be of these craft?
Well, there's, if you go back to, there are some Irish legends. There's legends going back to in fact, one of the groups of people in Ireland, and the story seems to be them coming in ships from the sky. So even in relation to the people themselves. So the idea is there. And if you look again back in the Celtic stories, there's an idea. You begin to wonder, well, how did they come up with these ideas about shape shifting and changing form? And I increasingly get a sense, a bit like Chariots of the Gods by von Daniken, but that some of what they were witnessing was high technology, that they were witnessing a more organic technology that may have existed. It's clear that if you accept any of the spiritual traditions, that there are, if you like, positive forces that are well disposed to us, and forces that are not. And we can see that in good and evil, in satanic, Christian, in all the traditions. There's this conflict between forces. Now, a lot of modern people believe they don't exist. This is all in the human psyche. It's all projection. I don't believe that. I have no problem believing that there are forces out there. The problem that we have now, from my perspective, is that, and this is relevant to your interview with the Canadian minister. At the time, some of these people were speaking. The governments weren't willing to admit that. I'm prepared to believe certain people about what's going on and the knowledge. My suspicion now is that one of the reasons why there is an explosion in government awareness about UFOs is because it will be a prelude to something like Independence Day, where they can utilize a fear of the unknown. This is what I think Henry Kissinger said, that if you use a fear of the unknown, you can get people to do anything. Now, we've seen that recently. So my fear is, well, not my fear, but my concern is that if insofar as a lot of information is coming now from the military industrial complex, well, I certainly am not going to give it much credibility. And we have to accept that we can be manipulated. But if you put that aside, that having been said, there are a lot of people who are being seriously interested in, who I would have respect for, or a lot of context. But we can leave that aside as well, because the fact is that there's been a history of experience of interaction with UFOs. There was a famous example in the 1500s in Nuremberg with the UFOs fighting in the sky. We got back in the Irish legends. There's even a story, I think there's a poem by an Irish poet about a craft which landed in a monastery, and they got caught, or some trails from the ship got caught, and an individual fell out and got back in. So these stories are there. Ships in the sky, craft in the sky, beings from other worlds, people being taken to other worlds, coming back 300 years later. All those stories are there. So I've no problems accepting that's there. The problem is that a lot of people don't accept, full stop, that there are malicious beings in this world. So it's very, very difficult for me when I'm talking about, say, automation, and about the idea that there's this group of people who don't believe that in our human dignity, who believe that we're animals. These are other humans. So if they don't accept that there's all these people out there, and that there are dangerous people out there, and there are people that don't want any good for us, well, you kind of can't go anywhere else. There's no good dealing with the creatures that we don't know, because we have to deal first with the reality of these forces. So it's clear to a lot of people that there's going to be good and bad in that context. So I talked about Fatima recently. Now, for people that don't believe, or there's a lot of people can't believe, if they're not Catholic, for example, they can't believe that the Virgin Mary appeared to the three children in Fatima in 1917, even though there was 75,000 people witnessed the miracle of Fatima on October 13th, 1917. Even people that were very, very skeptical, scientists, professors, Freemasons that were, etc. They witnessed this spectacle, although they were very skeptical, with the miracle of the sun, which was at the end of the sixth apparition. They wouldn't be able to accept that the Virgin Mary appeared to the children. If you didn't accept that, it's still consistent with a UFO experience. And whether it was one or the other, in some senses, doesn't make any difference to what the message is, although there's a lot of problems about what was actually said. So the point would be, the forces that want to control us and forces that want to help us, I believe both are there. And what the mystics are always saying is that there is a benign force, or what the Gnostics say, that you're trying to escape from the prison of perception. What Philip K. Dick is saying, that the beam of light to the vast active living intelligence system is a connection. It was the same thing for Robert Anton Wilson, and he lived in Ireland for a few years, Robert Anton Wilson, and he also uses that in the Illuminatus trilogy. when he's talking about the army from under the lake. That was actually there is an old Irish legend about that. So some of these things are recurrent ideas about these things. And again, if you look back, a lot of people don't, they'll believe in UFOs, but anything about spiritual experience, supernatural, they say, oh, that's different. Don't believe in that stuff. But if you look back, for example, about Columba, who I've talked about, the early Irish Christian saint in the 6th century. And I think that Robert Anton Wilson was probably interested in him as well. He is the person who has the first reference to the Loch Ness monster, or a monster in the Ness River going into Loch Ness. So there is a lot of sources that people ignore, which suggest a continuity of figures that are good and are bad. Now, my belief is that really the thing that we have control over is our own evolution. And certainly the argument that we might be seen to be a danger to other cultures is clear, because we're a danger to our other cultures on the earth. So we have to get our relationships right first our own development, then our relationships with our fellow human beings and animals, to repair the relationships which are broken down between the different peoples, to emphasize spiritual identity first, or we're not going to be able to do anything. And I think that the higher evolved beings are going to be, they might have great technology, but they will be spiritually evolved beings as well. So they're the ones that I believe that our kind of destiny is to relate to anyway. And that's what in all spiritual traditions, you're not setting your goal by corresponding or training or modeling the worst people or the worst beings. You're trying to set your sights on the Buddha or one of the higher beings. So I think there's both forces there. I think it's inherent in the universe. And I think if you look at all the great spiritual teachers, or look back at Steiner, or look back at all the people who are really into spiritual science, if you like, they talked about this warfare going on. And I think what's happening now is that there's an argument in Catholic discourse and at the same time Steiner, that Steiner makes this argument that what happened was this spiritual warfare, the warfare in the higher domain, came into the earth in the latter part of the 19th century. So that what's being manifest in the 20th century and now is a continuation of some kind of battle of consciousness between two opposing forces. And there's, if you want to identify what the negative force is, sometimes it's described as Luciferian, Satanic, or Ahrimanic, for example. We want to go back in the Persian approach. And there seems to be something in that, the core of that, in my view, is a contrast with the spirit, that the materialist viewpoint, the idea of materiality, of focus on things, of focus on controlling things, on not having things flowing and fluid, and to focus on that is a key element on the material world, like the satanic idea that the devil says, here, you can have all this, meaning the material world, but that's not what the spiritual path is about. Now, you could also see that in terms of the left brain and right brain that Ian McGilchrist has talked about. The left brain is, as he says, should be the servant of the right brain, but we've allowed the left brain rule us, and that's tyrannical, and that projects itself on the world and the desire to control. You could see it in those terms, but that, and again, may have connection with a higher source.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please help me out and like this video, then click the subscribe and get notifications buttons so you don't miss any of my latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Facebook at the Hannibal TV for more live streams and videos. And while you're at it, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the Hannibal TV.